Hey, it's me, Nalthazar, and welcome to another episode of Achieving Perfection. This is going to be for the Vaevictis Node in the Dragon War, the Legacy version. So, per the usual, I'm going to show off decks that I would suggest. I'm going to cover the node itself, the objectives, all that good stuff, and then I'm going to go over what I would do to create a deck if you can't make one of my suggested decks. So, the first of my suggested decks is for newer players. It's going to be to run Nissa Sage Animist. No, not that one. This one. I'd run something like this right here. And then for players that have more Planeswalkers and cards, this is where I would actually go ahead and use Brokon. And I would use this right here. All right. Let's get into the node itself. So for the Vaevictis node, we need to use a black, red, or green planeswalker. And for the objectives, we need to win the fight, cast 3 or more supports that cost 10 or less, and cast 4 or more creatures with cost 10 or less. Now, since both of those are cast, you can't special summon. It needs to be a casted creature. So something like Finale of Devastation or Killer Instinct will not count toward the casting. Make sure that you are casting. If you want to cheat things in some way, use Court of Calling or Summoner's Pact. The permanent support is going to make it so when you use your first ability, you destroy an enchantment of your opponent's. On the second, you destroy an artifact, and on the third, you destroy the opponent's first creature. So, I mean, you'll see a little bit of use out of this, but not a lot of use out of it. All right, so that's the node. Let's get back into the decks again. So for the decks, for the beginner one at least, right, what I would do is I'd use Nissa. And I'd use Nissa because there are a lot of supports that you can throw in here that are pretty easy to get. Nissa is going to draw cards pretty easily with her first ability, which is just going to sort of make sure that you draw into the supports that you want. And then with her second ability, you should hopefully be able to help yourself kill your opponent. So for the supports that I'm running here, I'd suggest Nissa's Pilgrimage and Sunset Pyramid. These are going to be some cheap supports. They're going to provide gem conversion and card draw. Gateway Plaza is also going to do the same. It's going to provide gem conversion, not card draw though. And then finally, although it doesn't help you with the support objective portion of this, Dragon's Horde is going to give both gem conversion and card draw. So I'd go ahead and use this one. Now for removal, we're pretty lucky here. We can run Death Sprout, and Death Sprout's going to help us get our lands, and it's going to remove things. But we can also run Akron Assassin, and this one's going to have Berserker Death Touch, so it's just going to go ahead, kill your opponent's first creature, as long as it's not flying. And then on top of that, it costs 6 mana, so it works toward completing the creature portion of our objective. I really like Growth Chamber Guardian for this, if you need a creature that can just create copies of itself, because Growth Chamber Guardian is going to create copies of itself, and then you can play those copies, and those copies count toward the cast objective. So Growth Chamber Guardian alone can complete the cast portion of this. Now, because it's a somewhat heavy support deck, having a card like Herald of the Pantheon isn't that bad. So it's got a 4/4 body for 7, which is pretty solid, and then it's going to give your supports in hand mana, and make it so that when you cast the supports, you gain life. So with Herald of the Pantheon, it automatically casts the Pilgrimage. It makes Sunset Pyramid cost 1 when you play it, so it's pretty nifty. And then finally, Knight of Autumn is a pretty solid power toughness creature that can also destroy supports. So this gives you a pretty decent amount of removal, pretty decent creatures, great mana conversion, and pretty decent card draw. Now, I'd also make sure that I was running a support removal card of some sort, or one other creature removal card. So I've got Nissa's Defeat here, but if you have Casualties of War, go ahead, throw that in instead. Now, if you have more cards at your disposal and you're able to make this deck, you're going to see it's very similar to the deck that I am using in Chromium, with just a few alterations. So I'm still running Barl, but I'm also throwing Startled Awake in, Startled Awake is going to provide mana, and it also is going to count as casting a creature that costs 10 or less. Both Borrow and Startled Awake count toward that portion of the objective. For supports, I'm running Fertile Thicket. This is going to convert gems to green on cast, which is great. And then also Prism Array, which is going to help with card draw, and then disabling on landfall. The rest of the deck is really just pretty run-of-the-mill. I've got the 4 Mythic Gem Converters, Rishkar's Hour of Promise, Seasons Past, and Nissa's Renewal. I'm running Blue Sun to draw extra cards, just keep drawing into the converters, good stuff like that. It also is going to immediately cast Borrow and Startled Awake, and then Beacon Bolt for the kill. Now, Beacon Bolt isn't just going to kill the opponent, but it's going to serve as creature removal, and if I wanted to, I could even target my own creatures to make sure I didn't kill too fast. So this deck, it does wonderfully. I've tested it out in the training grounds. It's pretty good. So I hope that if you have the cards, you can give this a shot. It's amazing. But I also hope that I don't play against you then, because this deck is a pain to play against. Now, let's pretend that you can't make either of these decks. So let's go into what should you do if you can't make either of them. Now, if you can't build either of the other two decks, don't worry. What you're going to want to do is go over here, go to your supports, and then just type in convert. You're going to want to make sure that you have some cards that cost 10 or less supports that are going to convert gems. Now, if you've gotten pretty lucky with your Eldraine pulls, you can try and just go ahead and pair both of your colored lands. So for green, Castle Garenbrig, which is 10 and converts to green, with Gingerbread Cabin, which is also 10 and converts to green. If you have the red ones, you can pair Castle Embereth, which converts to red, with Dwarven Mine, which is 10 and converts to red. So go ahead, go pair these two together. If you don't have them, fear not, there are plenty of other options at your disposal that are going to be converting gems at 10 mana or less. So as you can see, there are lots and lots and lots of them. If you haven't had enough of it yet, you can absolutely run a Rupture Spire deck for this node. It works out very well. Go ahead, throw in Scape Shift and Death Sprout, and you're going to complete the support portion of this in no time flat. If you're not familiar with Scape Shift, it is a horribly evil card. It's basically Rupture Spire as a spell, but it then fetches Rupture Spire if Rupture Spire is the only land in your deck. So if you're doing Scape Shift, Death Sprout, Rupture Spire, just use Rupture Spire as a land. Don't have any other lands in your deck. Honestly, you don't even need any other supports. That's all you need. So make sure you have other card draw and you're good. Now, for your creatures that are going to cost 10 or less, I'm going to break it into 2 tiers. Did I put it how I wanted? I did, yeah, okay. So for the 10 or less creatures, we've got a lot of creatures at our disposal. Obviously, something like Barl is the ideal best case scenario, but if you don't have Barl, you can actually go ahead and make a pretty sickening zombie deck using nonsense like Diregriff Colossus, along with Prized Amalgam, which is, I should just type in Prized Amalgam, shouldn't I? Right here. So when Prized Amalgam dies, and then anytime you have a zombie enter the battlefield, this thing's just going to come back. So if you've got the whole zombie thing going, the Amalgam is a great way to go. It returning from the battlefield does not count because you have to cast. Summon does not count. But that works. Lazav, the Multifarious, is great for this because the copies that come to your hand with half mana of the creatures can then be cast. So this does help toward the cast objective. And as Lazav surveils, if you have other things that are going to toss creatures into your graveyard, it works pretty nicely. The only thing that I have against it is just that Lazav has 3 power. So he's not very strong. Creatures that have X in their cost, so things like Voracious Hydra, things like Hydroid Krasis, things like Ugin's Conjurant, are all pretty solid options also. They're going to fill that 10 or less mana threshold requirement and then put in a lot of damage, so they're really strong. You can run Charmed Prince in conjunction with a legendary creature. that costs 10 or less, and then Charmed Prince counts as a cast. The legendary creature which you've already played will have counted as a cast, and then it's returned to your hand and you can play it again. So Charmed Prince is going to help you get through that pretty darn quickly too. Really, there's a lot of great options at your disposal here. Harsh Mentor is another excellent option because your opponent is probably going to be a horrible person like me and running gem conversion nonsense. So this is just going to make it so that it punishes them really, really hard if they don't have Prism Array. So ideally, some of this can help you out from the mythic and rare standpoint. Now let's take a look. Oh, actually, there were, There were two other cards. Biovisionary is going to serve the same purpose as the previous Adapt card. It just costs less mana, so I like it more. And, come on. Brazen Borrower is amazing. It serves as removal and then as a creature that you can play for the objective, which is awesome, amazing, and fantastic. So from the common and uncommon standpoint, here's where I would actually go ahead and suggest potentially even running a Nahiri deck. And if you're running a Nahiri deck, you can run some of the smaller things like Enlightened Ascetic and get away with it because Nahiri's first is going to buff it up, and you're going to get a lifelink creature that gets pretty powerful pretty fast, which makes you pretty hard to kill. Other than that, you can throw in some of the nice little double strikers. So I know that there was recently let's get rid of the commons for a quick hot second. There was a 6-mana double striker that recently came out. It's a white creature. It's Fencing Ace, I think is the name. Fencing Ace. So you power this thing up and it just max on your opponent pretty hard. Not you, I don't like you. Ruin Rat is another great card here. It's going to have Defender and it's also got Death Touch, so it's going to block and kill things. It's kind of like that common elf. You can run either of them. I wouldn't run both of them. Neither of them are particularly strong as things go. Volcanic Rambler is another excellent choice for this because it's going to help with providing mana, and it's pretty cheap with a pretty powerful body. So really, there are a lot of choices at your disposal, a lot of really good cards that are 10 or less, but make sure that you're building your deck around what you have gem conversion for that's 10 or less. So I tend to think that green is the easiest because of Nissa's Pilgrimage, since everyone has it. But if you have other options at your disposal, go ahead and use those. So I hope this helps you get perfect, and I hope to see you in the next one.